Police sirens were heard throughout the Denver neighborhood on October 5, 1996, in response to a call about an apartment in the 1900 block of East 17th Avenue. Terry Turack, a 35-year-old woman, was found dead inside. Terry was found by the police to have been strangled and had suffered serious head injuries. What could have happened between Terry and her attacker to cause her tragic death, and who could have committed such an evil act? With a population of 700,000, Denver, Colorado, has a vibrant mix of history and culture that draws many visitors to its many museums. With a wealth of historical and recreational sites, this city seamlessly blends the old and the new. The small-town feel of Denver's neighborhoods is reflected in the welcoming locals who are known for their adventurous spirit and who frequently know their neighbors by name. However, Denver faces urban challenges, such as having one of the highest crime rates in the country. This problem casts a shadow over its tight-knit neighborhoods. The unsolved Terry Turack case from 1996 serves as a sobering reminder of this darker side of the city's existence. Terry Turack, who was born on May 14, 1961, was from Michigan's vast countryside. She was the daughter of James C. Turack, a brave Vietnam War veteran and honorable sergeant in the U.S. Air Force. Terry possessed a resilient spirit as a child. While the specifics of Terry's mother, Marlene Elsekish, are still unknown, her father, James, was the epitome of a loving father to Terry, despite his tough exterior as a military man. The fact that Terry wasn't an only child is well known. A few years later after her birth, her younger brother, James Turack Jr., joined the family, and the two of them quickly developed a strong and close bond that lasted well into adulthood. As time unfolded, Terry accepted motherhood with grace. She graciously wed a man named Douglas in Oakland in 1979, and the couple was blessed with 3 kids. Her kids' names are unknown, but one thing was undeniable. Terry was a fantastic mother. James Jr. often recalled her maternal tendencies. Terry was always praised for the attention and love she gave to her children. As the years passed, Terry separated from her husband and had made a home at 1900 East 17th Avenue in Denver, Colorado. She had a complicated love life. Although she was in a primary relationship, there were rumors that she was open to other options. Terry's life was in a stable period, with friends, family, and the typical ups and downs. She was maximizing her lifetime. But because of the rise and fall of life, it is impossible to predict what lies ahead. Therefore, no one could have predicted that Terry's happy times were coming to an end. Denver's residents appeared to be going about their daily lives on Friday, October 4, 1996, unaware of the impending tragedy. Terry Turack completed her day at work and left for home with the intention of spending the evening with friends. She relished the solitude of her empty apartment while her kids were away. She got ready to partake in Denver's exciting nightlife as dusk fell. Around 8 o'clock, Terry left her apartment. Her spirit coexisted peacefully with the city's spirit. There are traces of Terry's night scattered here and there. Around 11:30 p.m., a neighbor saw Terry coming home. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary, but time and events have a way of taking everyone by surprise. The next day, on Saturday, October 5th, the early morning sun casts long shadows over Terry's apartment building, which had become silent. Strangely, Terry's apartment door remained open. After hours passed, a worried neighbor didn't see the open door until the noon sun reached its highest point. He might have assumed she had overslept or that she was taking a shower. Just to be sure, he peered into Terry's apartment and shouted out her name, but he heard no response despite his voice resonating throughout the living room. Terry was nowhere to be found when a quick search of the living room and kitchen was conducted. The neighbor then made an attempt to do a last stop at her bedroom. He, however, couldn't believe what he saw when he arrived. Terry, who he had just seen the previous evening when she was vivacious and alive, now laid lifeless on the floor of her bedroom. His fear increased. He scrambled for his phone as he hurried outside and dialed 911. His voice trembled in shock as he spoke to the operator. Police sirens could be heard in the distance, getting louder and louder until there was a discord outside Terry's apartment. Police officers who had mastered composure intervened to take control while masking their internal dread. The scene, which featured a life lost too soon, a shocked community, and a family left in agony, was all too common. When Terry Turack's body was found, her case was launched immediately. The entire community was affected, not just her family. Detectives from the Denver Police Department led the investigation to find out what caused this sinister discovery. They understood the significance of the scene in front of them right away. The bedroom depicts a violent story. There were obvious indications of a struggle, suggesting that Terry had fought hard for her life. In an effort to fill in the blanks of that fateful night, neighbors mentioned disturbances between 1 o'clock and 1:30 a.m. The door to Terry's apartment was obviously left open, a spooky invitation to the horror inside, but nobody had reported seeing anyone leave. Detectives speculated that the perpetrator might have known Terry or had gained her trust in order to take advantage of it in the most wicked way, given that there was no sign of forced entry. The medical examiner, Dr. T. Henry, had the grim duty of looking over Terry's body. The outcomes were unexpected. Terry had been severely assaulted in addition to being killed. Her death was attributed to strangulation, but there was also evidence of blunt force trauma, making for a horrifying end to a life that had otherwise been full of promise. A hair found on Terry's thighs stood out as detectives searched Terry's body. They hoped that this small strand of hair would hold the key to discovering who killed her. Investigators connected with Terry's friends and neighbors to piece together the story, and it didn't take long for perplexing tidbits of information to start to emerge. Around 11:30 p.m., Terry was last seen entering her apartment, and a neighbor noticed she wasn't alone. She was accompanied by an African-American man with a unique afro. It was unknown if he was a friend or enemy, but he was the last person seen with Terry. The timeline was further complicated when a different neighbor reported hearing noises coming from Terry's apartment around 12:30 a.m. It's interesting to note that Terry was observed knocking on another neighbor's door at 1 o'clock a.m., appearing to be hurt and pleading, asking for money. Could this be connected to the man she was seen earlier with? Terry's boyfriend, whose identity was kept private, provided the information that was the most revealing. While he had a story from the week before that raised questions, he had an alibi for the night of the murder. Terry and her boyfriend had been robbed and assaulted inside Terry's apartment by 3 unidentified African-American men. Was this incident related to her eventual homicide in any way? The detectives were plagued by that question. The weeks that followed saw the pursuit of leads. Terry was seen with a mysterious man who later became a person of interest. Was he related to the assault from the previous week, or was Terry's request for cash that night somehow connected to him? Despite the police's best efforts, the reliable evidence required to identify a suspect eluded them. Even though a key suspect was brought in and subjected to questioning and DNA testing, disappointment sets in when the results were revealed. It did not match his DNA. With each passing day, the community's suffering grew worse. For clarification and some semblance of justice, the neighborhood looked to the detectives. The loss of Terry left her family devastated, and they clung to the hope that the offender would be caught and punished. But as the weeks turned into months, the once shining trail started to fade. Despite their best efforts, the detectives had to face the harsh possibility that they might never catch Terry's killer. Sadly, leads that had once shown promise dwindled, and the case became unproductive. However, the cold and seemingly unsolvable case experienced a sudden and unexpected resurgence in 2004. Time's veils, which had concealed clues and obscured the way to justice, were now starting to lift. Nearly 10 years after the horrifying incident, in August of that year, there was a significant development. The hit was detected by the CODIS DNA system, a comprehensive database that contains DNA profiles from all over the country. It matched the DNA evidence that had been taken years earlier from Terry's body. For the investigators, this DNA had always been a loose end, a piece of the puzzle that wouldn't fit anywhere. But now, there was a lead. The investigation into this reopened case was given to Detective Dixie, an experienced detective. She was determined to follow this new lead and see where the investigation would go, and this DNA trail led them right to Ricky Dawson, thanks to her analytical mind and methodical approach. Ricky had experience with the law. His DNA was already present in the CODIS database, which suggested that he had a criminal history. An African-American man named Ricky Dawson unexpectedly found himself at the center of this investigation. After many years, the Terry Turack case was once again the focus of the attention of the law enforcement community. Now that they had a new lead and a rekindled zeal, it was hoped that this new lead would finally put an end to a troubling chapter in the city's past and bring justice to a person who had been wronged. With a name and a face to work with, Detective Dixie started attempting to understand the relationship between Terry and Dawson. Did they have a mutual relationship? Was there a reason behind the killing? Were there any additional pieces of proof or witnesses that the initial investigation might have missed? The case, which was once a terrifying puzzle covered in a layer of mystery, had changed into a maze of connections that were just waiting to be explored. As Detective Dixie dug deeper, it became clear that the task at hand was to confirm the DNA match, establish the story, and create a solid case against the new prime suspect. The Denver streets, where rumors and theories about the case once circulated, now awaited news over the case. They eagerly anticipated the day when they would declare Terry had received justice. The majority of the city was upbeat, but there were still many obstacles to be overcome. Although compelling, DNA evidence is not the be-all and end-all of a criminal case. Finding a suspect is one thing, but establishing their guilt beyond a reasonable doubt is quite another. On January 24, 1961, in Florida, Ricky Dawson, a man whose life seemed to contain both darkness and light, was born. In 2004, he was 43 years old. It indicates that he was 35 at the time of Terry Turack's tragic death in 1996. Terry wasn't his only link to the dark, though. Dawson had his own difficulties when he was younger. There were complications throughout his childhood. It's been said that a person's behavior as a child often provides a window into their future, and Ricky was no exception. His marital status, education, and other personal information are still unknown. But his criminal record is one thing that stands out. The criminal activity that Dawson is involved in is not just in Terry's case. His DNA was discovered to match an unnamed profile from a terrifying case that occurred in Seattle in 2000. Debbie Cascio, a 40-year-old woman, was his victim. The tragic circumstances surrounding Terry's death and Debbie's are similar. Like Terry, Debbie had multiple blunt force traumas and was in pain. Debbie was strangled and had multiple blunt force injuries like Terry as well. The unfortunate relationship between the two women and Ricky Dawson attracted the attention of the law. Once more, the city and Debbie's devoted daughter, Tabitha Johnson, both worked to preserve her memory. As a gesture by the Homeless Remembrance Project to ensure Debbie's story is never forgotten, a leaf of remembrance at the Seattle Justice Center bears her name. Tabitha, who was only 11 years old when her mother died, has been a model of tenacity. She recalls memories of her mother, including times spent at the beach or creating art with glass. Even after becoming a mother herself, Tabitha is still grieving Debbie's loss. Despite her desire for closure and justice, the specifics of her mother's case are still unknown because the Seattle police haven't disclosed more information. The criminal activities of Ricky Dawson continued beyond Seattle and Denver. In 2004, he ended up in Florida's police custody. At that time, Denver police learned that a DNA match connected him to the 1996 Terry Turack cold case. While in Florida, he admitted guilt to second-degree murder in exchange for a 25-year prison term. Now he is charged with first-degree murder in connection with the Terry Turack case in Denver. The investigation into Terry Turack's murder accelerated as soon as Ricky Dawson's name appeared. Detectives searched for any mention of Ricky in the case files and interview transcripts from the initial investigation. Although they weren't able to find his name right away, they were in for a surprise. Ricky's description of the man, Terry, was with the night she was killed matched that provided by her neighbors. Ricky's criminal history was quickly revealed, and it was shocking. He was a persistent offender. His name was associated with a long list of crimes. Detectives recognized him as a key suspect in Terry Turack's case and knew they needed to speak with him. At the Suwanee Correctional Facility in Florida, where Ricky Dawson was already incarcerated, they came face to face with him in December 2004. Finding out what Ricky knew about Terry and proving his involvement in her tragic demise were detectives' stated objectives. During the interview, another intriguing lead emerged. A friend of Ricky's, whose name was withheld, gave his account about the night Terry was killed. Terry was well acquainted with Ricky's friend. He acknowledged spending time in her apartment with her and Ricky, and even confirmed being there the night she was reported killed. He claimed that all three of them had used drugs. Even though he said he left at midnight, he wasn't aware of what happened next. The puzzle was beginning to come together. A path had now been set out in front of the detectives. They performed an important DNA test. The new DNA samples obtained from Ricky were compared to the major DNA profile of the hair discovered on Terry's body, and there was a match. With this concrete proof, Ricky Dawson's involvement in Terry's death was established. But unexpectedly, no charges were brought against him for her killing right away. Some speculated that this was because Ricky had already served about 20 years of his current sentence. As a result, Terry's case sat idle for more than 10 more years. 14 years later, a new hope for justice surfaced. Detective John McGrail, from the Denver Police Cold Case Unit, was tasked with reviewing the case. McGrail examined the case's details and came to the conclusion that the evidence present was quite convincing. In some ways, the case appeared to be settled. In order to cover all bases, he decided to submit the evidence for additional laboratory testing in December 2018. This included evidence gathered from the crime scene and Terry's post-mortem examination results. By August 2019, the DNA evidence findings had produced a solid match. The wheels of justice began to turn more quickly. Ricky Dawson, the Ricky who had been serving time in Florida's prison for a different crime, was the only person in whom the puzzle pieces pointed. With the fresh evidence in hand, it was obvious that it was time to hold Dawson accountable for the murder of Terry. Time travel to January 26, 2023, which was an important day in the investigation. Ricky Dawson was officially charged with the first-degree murder of Terry Turack, and an arrest warrant was issued for him. At the age of 62, Ricky discovered himself in a more difficult legal situation. Even though he was already detained in Florida, justice did not stand still. The Denver Police Department obtained his extradition so that he could answer for his actions in Denver. On February 23, when Ricky learned of the allegations against him, the seriousness of the situation hit him. March 23, 2023, was designated as the date of the court appearance, which was eagerly anticipated. Many people anticipate Ricky Dawson will be found guilty for his role in Terry's tragic death, despite the fact that the court's final decision has not yet been made public. They felt this way because of the mounting evidence against him. James Turack, Terry's brother, never fully recovered from the pain of losing his sister in 1996. He struggled for 27 long years, torn between hope and despair, wondering if Terry's premature death would ever bring about justice. James, however, was overcome by a wave of emotions after hearing the recent news of an arrest in relation to the murder of his sister. James spoke to the media about his unwavering dedication to his sister's case and how he had always held on to the hope that the truth would eventually surface. James became more aware of the seriousness of the situation when he learned that the alleged offender was being extradited to stand trial. He addressed the hole Terry's absence had left, calling it an irreplaceable loss that time would never fill. He often pondered the life experiences she passed up, particularly the joy of becoming a grandmother. James finally recalled that Terry had a contagious spirit that affected everyone she knew. James acknowledged that, despite having a desire for forgiveness, he is still working on it. It is a challenging journey because the pain is still too recent. Above all else, he made clear that he wanted justice to win. James wants to see Terry's memory honored by the justice she deserved 52 years ago by making sure Ricky Dawson faces the full force of the law and is imprisoned for the rest of his days. What do you think about this case? Post your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more engrossing true crime tales. On June 5, 2000, at 1 p.m., Sharon Anschutz, a 54-year-old woman, was shot and killed at the John Butler Dry Cleaners on Easley Bridge Road. Additionally, there were no arrests made for an extended period of time, which caused complete panic in the neighborhood. The culprit remained unidentified for more than 20 years, but the investigation was revived in 2022 by a reconstituted cold case unit. A team of meticulous investigators and forensic specialists worked to unearth the long-hidden truth. They carefully re-interviewed both new and old witnesses and assessed forensic data. After 20 years, the murderer was finally apprehended. How did that fateful night's events transpire? Why did the investigators decide to reopen this long-closed case in the eyes of the justice system? Greenville County, South Carolina is a bustling and populous area. More people live there than in any other county in the state. The county seat, where important decisions are made, is located in Greenville. What distinguishes Greenville County is its emphasis on education. Greenville County is the largest school district in South Carolina. Students learn, develop, and make plans for the future here. Greenville County is more than just choices in schools. Another attraction is the natural beauty, which includes peaceful landscapes and undulating hills. This place has a very welcoming community. Tragedies, though, can happen even in this peaceful paradise. The unsolved case of Sharon Anschutz, which persisted for almost 20 years, left a lasting impression on the town. The 19th of October 1945 saw the birth of Sharon Anschutz, daughter of Leslie Franklin Kellogg and Leona Rosetta Chester Prince. Sharon developed into a strong, driven adult. She brought warmth and a work ethic that was characteristic of the Midwest, having grown up in northern Michigan. Alongside her sisters, Gloria Hopkins, Sandra Sanders, and Leslie Kellogg, Sharon Anschutz grew up in Michigan. She also grew up alongside her brothers, Ivan Tucker and Marjorie Perrin Richard Kellogg. She inherited kindness and a desire to make the world a better place from her early years. At exactly 21 years old, on July 12, 1966, she gave birth to a son named Frank. Public access to her and her son's relationship is currently restricted. Sharon relocated to Greenville, South Carolina in her mid-40s, where she established herself and had additional children. She also had two other sons, Walter and Michael, and a daughter, Christina. She was employed at the John Butler Dry Cleaners on Easley Bridge Road, which would subsequently serve as the scene of a tragic incident. Locals knew the small dry cleaners on Easley Bridge Road. Neighbors chatted while dropping off or picking up their laundry at this communal hub. 54 years old Sharon Anschutz, the woman in charge of this dry cleaning establishment, was well known for her diligence and congenial demeanor. She was a beloved member of the Greenville community, having grown up in Michigan. Sadly, on June 5, 2000, Sharon was shot and killed during a robbery at her dry cleaning. Greenville County was forever altered by this tragedy. The killer of Sharon remained a mystery for more than 20 years. The quiet upstate town of Greenville, South Carolina, was horrified to learn of Sharon's horrific murder. On June 5, 2000, during the late summer twilight, dry cleaners were getting ready to close as the sun was setting. creating long shadows on the empty streets. Sharon arranged the counter as usual. She had no idea it would get dark on this typical evening. Among the friends and regulars that evening was an unexpected presence. A certain 44-year-old man had visited the dry cleaners. He occasionally performed strange tasks around the store, such as emptying the trash. His intentions on this fateful evening were, however, not pure. This man was going to rob the dry cleaners. He watched the company's activities in silence, waiting for the ideal moment to strike. With every task he completed in the days preceding the crime, he got closer to his malevolent objective. On the evening of June 5, 2000, he suddenly made contact with Sharon with malicious intent. Sharon stood up for herself and her dry cleaning company during a terrible ordeal. There was a gunshot at the end of the conflict that reverberated throughout the community for years. That fateful night, silence was shattered by a gunshot. The beautiful Sharon Anschutz was killed by a senseless act of violence. Her life of kindness and hard work came to an abrupt end when she was shot in the back. As the gunshot faded, the gravity of the situation hit home. Once the killer realized how serious his act was, he left shock, terror, and sadness in his wake. Tragically killed in a place where she had brought so much joy, Sharon lay behind the counter in the pool of her own blood. The neighborhood was shocked by the tragedy that night. At 1:30 p.m., a customer discovered her dead and called 911. The dry cleaners, which was once a cozy and welcoming place, turned into a somber reminder of the darkness that can be found anywhere. Sharon's work ethic and steadfastness were deeply mourned by her colleagues, friends, and family. While the murderer was at large, local authorities began a vigorous investigation. They wished to stop such a horrible act from occurring in their neighborhood, send Sharon's assailant to prison, and provide closure to her bereaved family. Despite their best efforts, the murder investigation into Sharon Anschutz stalled. In the dark, the killer had eluded capture. Following the disaster at John Butler Dry Cleaners in June 2000, Greenville County was in disbelief. Following the murder of the community's beloved Sharon Anschutz, justice had to be served. The early investigation into this horrific murder demonstrated the resolve of law enforcement, as well as the community's optimistic quest for answers. When first responders arrived, the investigation started. The offender was the subject of an instant manhunt by the Greenville County Sheriff's Office. A thorough search of the crime scene was conducted for evidence, and witnesses who lived nearby were questioned. It was clear from the beginning that solving this case would require unwavering perseverance. One of the detective's biggest problems early on in the case was the absence of a suspect. With minimal evidence, Sharon was killed in the shadows. Still, the investigation was shaped by the possibility of a robbery. According to early witness accounts, the intruder intended to loot the dry cleaners. It seemed as though Sharon Anschutz had been violently robbed while attempting to defend her business. As investigators tried to find the person responsible for this horrific act of violence, this information further complicated the case. It was necessary to gather and analyze copious amounts of evidence for the initial inquiry. Every square inch of the crime scene was examined in search of hints about the perpetrator. Investigators looked for physical evidence that might provide a breakthrough, such as DNA and fingerprints. Questions were asked of witnesses at the dry cleaners. Their crucial testimony provided important details about the pre- and post-crime activities. They described the events of that night, including Sharon Anschutz's terrifying encounter with her attacker. Sharon Anschutz, who touched many lives, was mourned in Greenville County while law enforcement conducted an investigation. Her coworkers, friends, and family were in mourning. The community stood by Sharon's family during the investigation and promised to pursue justice. The outcome of the case depended on their determination. As leads dwindled and witnesses grew more elusive, the case stagnated. Sharon's loved ones remembered her, but her killer remained a mystery. The case was eventually filed under cold case. Leads dried up, witnesses moved on, and the trail of the criminal became more bleak every day. The prolonged investigation caused suffering for Sharon's friends, family, and community. This terrible crime's perpetrator was unknown for more than 20 years. Victim Sharon Anschutz continues to exist. She was a representation of strength and hope. It was hope that justice would triumph and the truth would come to light. For more than 20 years, Greenville County, South Carolina, was plagued by her cold case. A renewed quest for justice in the summer of 2022 brought this long-dormant investigation back to life. The tipping point was the new cold case unit of the Greenville County Sheriff's Office, which debuted in the summer of 2022. Sheriff Lewis established a specialized unit in 2020 to look into cases that remain unsolved, such as the Sharon Anschutz cold case. His objectives were to resurrect past investigations, assess the evidence, speak with witnesses again, and employ fresh techniques. The pursuit of justice for victims of unsolved crimes was revitalized by this cold case unit. The community was assured that every case would be taken seriously and that no effort would be spared. The Sharon Anschutz cold case reinvestigation started by detectives reaching out to witnesses of the June 2000 incident at the dry cleaners in an attempt to gather information. They confronted witnesses whose memories had faded. Regardless, reconstructing the crime and the attacker's actions required careful consideration of their testimonies. These extra interviews shed light on the events of that evening. The murderer's meeting of Sharon Anschutz was revealed by witnesses. Their memories, though fading, were essential to solving the mystery. Technology and forensic evidence were scarce early in the case, but over time, forensic science developed. This gave the reinvestigation team the opportunity to assess the evidence with state-of-the-art techniques. Forensic specialists meticulously examined crime scene material using modern methodologies in order to uncover new information. Ballistic testing and DNA fingerprinting were repeated. Although exhausting, it resulted in a breakthrough. Old clues were re-examined, and new leads surfaced as the investigation went on. Witnesses who were interviewed again disclosed the attacker's goals. The horrifying events that transpired at the dry cleaners were re-examined and determined to be an attempted robbery gone wrong. Detectives learned more about the crime as a result of this. Investigators also looked into the connections of Roger Keith Hudgens, the key suspect who died in 2008. Hudgens was a neighbor of the dry cleaners. Witness accounts and his connections within the establishment shed light on the murderer's activities. The breakthrough in the Sharon Anschutz cold case was the result of diligent work, fresh interviews, and advanced forensic analysis. Investigators determined that Sharon Anschutz was killed by 44-year-old Roger Keith Hudgens at the beginning of January 2023. Testimonies from witnesses and forensic evidence shed light on that fatal evening. Horrible things happened as a result of Hudgens' plan to rob the dry cleaners. In the Sharon Anschutz cold case, no one was taken into custody despite this effort. Hudgens is the culprit, the investigators concluded, but he passed away in 2008. It provided closure to the victim's family and addressed inquiries from the community. The crime and its aftermath will always be associated with Hudgens, even though he was never charged with it. Even though no one was arrested, Greenville County was prepared for the Sharon Anschutz cold case trial after 20 years of uncertainty. Justice had produced findings that would go to trial. Roger Keith Hudgens, the main suspect, went on trial, even in death. His actions on that fateful day in June 2000 were gaining legal attention, even after he passed away in 2008. The personnel at the dry cleaners knew Hudgens, a local from Sharon Anschutz's tragic robbery. Witness accounts and forensic evidence would be used by the prosecution to discredit Hudgens. As the trial started, the courtroom was filled with anticipation. The prosecution meticulously gathered testimony from witnesses about that terrible night. They gave a detailed account of Hudgens and Sharon Anschutz's meeting prior to the crime. The forensic evidence that was re-examined was crucial to the case. Experts in ballistics attested that Hudgens' weapon was used in the killing. His DNA was found at the crime scene, which provided strong evidence in his criminal case. To undermine the prosecution, the defense made a move. They questioned witness accounts, saying that memories had become hazy with time. To cast doubt, they also questioned the chain of custody for the evidence. Weeks of court cases, talks, and introspection led up to the moment of truth. The jury unanimously found Roger Keith Hudgens guilty of killing Sharon Anschutz, the verdict that provided closure to Sharon's family and confirmed the community's and law enforcement's commitment to justice reverberated throughout the courtroom. Despite his passing, Hudgens will always be associated with the senseless crime that left the town scarred. Roger Keith Hudgens was found guilty, and his sentencing commenced. A sentence that was appropriate for the crime was what the prosecution sought. The defense, on the other hand, asked for mercy, pointing to Hudgens's innocence and lack of criminal history. The trial came to an end when Hudgens was found guilty of the tragedy that occurred that evening. Some criminals leave an indelible mark on the people they wronged. Roger Keith Hudgens' life was connected to Greenville County's most horrifying incident in the Sharon Anschutz cold case. Roger Keith Hudgens was familiar with Greenville County. Hudgens' birth date is September 13, 1955. He had a good local reputation. He was well known for frequenting the dry cleaners where the old case started. Hudgens performed strange jobs at the dry cleaners over the years. Every now and then, he removed the trash. On February 17, 2008, Roger Keith Hudgens passed away. His violent deed, which dates back years, left a legacy. He passed away due to medical issues. Any legal action against him was terminated by his death because he would never face justice. His name was still connected to the unsolved case of Sharon Anschutz. Even though he would never be held responsible, justice would always be associated with him and his deeds. What are your thoughts on this case? Let us know what you think by leaving a comment. Remember to subscribe to and like the channel. Until next time, be careful and vigilant in anticipation of the next mystery to be unraveled. Thank you for watching.